Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to give you some book recommendations. There's something about this time of year, and actually it starts before this time of year. It starts before December. For me, it really starts hardcore November, but it starts a little bit in October as well with kind of Victober and Victorian books. But there's something about the colder months and the shorter days that make me want to crack open a book that I savor. So I'm not a fast-paced book, not a book I fly through, but a book I can take my time with, either because the writing is beautiful and I want to slow down for it, or it's a slow-moving plot, or maybe it is just a gigantic book that is going to take some time to read. I've got a little bit of all of those in this video. It's just some suggestions of more slow-paced books that you can slow down with during these colder months. Not all of these books are large books, but they are just more slow. Some of them are more slice of life. Some of them have action in them, but it takes a while to get to that action. So I hope that you enjoy these recommendations. Let's start with classics because that is, always my most read genre. I'm a huge fan of classic literature, and I always want to find classic literature that I can recommend to you that you would also enjoy. The first classic on my list is also quite seasonal in that we open with a Christmas scene, although the book takes place over years, so it's not all Christmassy. That's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. You've probably heard of this book. You've probably seen movie adaptations, but if you haven't read the book itself, you definitely need to. This is a slow book that takes place over really a very long time, at least a decade, following four sisters as they are growing up and learning life lessons, learning how to be good people, and all of them have very distinct and different personalities, and their mother imparts a lot of wisdom to them as they are growing up, but you see them as children, as teenagers, as young adults, as they fall in love and start families of their own. And so it is just really a beautiful book, one of my favorites of all time. On a completely different note is a book that I feel like the first part of this book is almost painfully slow, but it's so worth reading. It's one of my favorite books of the year last year, and that's The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. The description of this book talks about a man who is a double agent working for two different agencies, and one of the agencies tells him that in order to continue to be a secret agent for them, he needs to blow up this building so he can put some things in motion and start kind of drawing people's attention to this cause. That sounds really exciting and really fast-paced, but the first half of this book is really very philosophical and involves a lot of conversations between a lot of different people, talking about anarchy, talking about being a secret agent, talking about the morals and ethics behind overthrowing or being a mover and shaker behind the scenes, why government needs to be overthrown sometimes. There's a lot of conversations that are honestly like kind of interesting, but don't feel like they're moving the plot forward in any way, shape, or form. However, once you get to the point, about halfway, I think, that the building does get blown up, there are other things that come into play, and you learn that this book is not so much a book about anarchy, but more a book that is a psychological profile of a family. Our secret agent, who is the title character, his wife, and then her mentally disabled brother who lives with them. And it is just such a deep dive into the psyche of humanity, and I loved it. Next, we have one of my favorite books this year, which is Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. If you are looking for a slice of life, slow-paced book, this is it. It has beautiful writing. We follow a young girl named Molly. At the beginning of the book, she's a young child, but that's really just for the first chapter. After that, we fast forward about 10 years to where she is now either 16 or 17 years old. Her father is a doctor, and he's realizing that as his daughter is getting older and there are suitors and men interested in her, it would behoove him to remarry so she has a mother to guide her through these parts of her life. And so we follow the Gibson family after, the doctor remarries, and Molly navigating life with a new stepmother and a stepsister that is the exact same age as her. So we have a lot of growing pains from Molly and her relationship with other people in the town, as well as, her falling in love and all of those kinds of things. It is just beautifully written. Molly is someone that you just absolutely root for in every circumstance. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of infuriating characters that you just kind of want to punch them or shake them or something. It is very well rounded in all of that. And this was actually Gaskell's final novel, but she died before it was completed. And so there is an editor's note at the end of my book that wraps things up well enough because there's only one chapter left in the book. And so you know how it's going to end, but the editorial note was not only satisfying in the ending of what Gaskell had planned for the end of the book, but it's a really beautiful tribute to Gaskell as a writer and a woman. Next, we have a Russian classic because I feel like wintertime, Russian, cold, yes, all of that. So, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This is one of his larger books, not the largest. War and Peace is longer than this, but this is still like a good 1,000-page long book. So if you're looking for a slower book to get you through the winter months, this is a good one. This is really the story of a family and different family members that we follow. We have, a woman who is unhappily married, and we kind of follow her love affair. And then we also have, I think it's her cousin and his family, and we follow all of them as well. So there's a large cast of characters. Don't be intimidated by that, because you spend enough time with each character that you get to know them all very well. And I loved this book. I actually read this book really quickly when I read it a few years ago. So it's odd, I guess, that I'm putting it on a slow burn list. But I don't think that that's typical. I think the drama made me want to figure out where there was going. There's enough drama. But there's also a lot of side tangents because Tolstoy definitely does that. There are conversations about the morality and ethics of land ownership and serfs living on the land. There are long conversations about farming. So there are kind of some asides that do slow down the plot, and there's enough that happens that it does take place over a long enough time that it is much more slow moving, but don't think it's devoid of drama because it's definitely there as well. A classic fantasy is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And everyone's heard of this, I'm certain, but maybe you haven't read it. Maybe you have only watched the movies. And if that's the case, you are missing out big time. This is a sweeping epic of good versus evil, of the power of friendship and support, and really great conversations about morality. And there's just so much to love about this book. It's beautifully written, very descriptive, really very deep lore that goes beyond this book, very deep development of the world, including languages that Tolkien created just for this world, which is really amazing and really cool. So I love Lord of the Rings. You probably know that. If you've been here for any length of time, you'll know that it's one of my favorite books of all time. And I am including it in one slot because they were all intended to go together. And I actually have a bind up that has all of them together. But this is actually my most reread book of all time, other than the Bible, because I have read all 3 Lord of the Rings books back to back 13 times over the course of my life, and I'm already getting the itch to read them again. One of my favorite classic slow-paced authors is Willa Cather, and I have to recommend My Antonia to you if you have not read it already. This is a beautiful, beautiful story about 2 young people who moved to the Nebraskan prairies when they're very young. One of them, Jim, his parents passed away and he is going to move in with his grandparents and they're raising him. The other, Antonia, is a Bohemian immigrant who doesn't even know English, and so Jim, the young boy, is encouraged by Antonia's father to teach her English, and as a result, they have a developing relationship and friendship that carries out throughout the rest of their lives. And so we start with them as children. It feels very vignette, but then we follow them as they become young adults. And then at the very end, we kind of come full circle to the beginning of the story in a really beautiful and meaningful way that talks about the value of your roots and your home and the influence that that has on you for the rest of your life. The last classic I'm going to recommend to you is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Steinbeck has written a lot of books. He was a very prolific writer, The Grapes of Wrath is actually the more recent book of his that I have read. Well, I reread it. I read it in high school and then I read it again last year. This tells the story of a family as they are traveling from Oklahoma during the time of the Dust Bowl looking for more opportunity and work in California. And it very directly conveys the conditions of the work camps where these workers were staying, the unfair wages, and all of those kinds of things. It's really movingly written. There's a lot of bleakness to it, which is also very common with Steinbeck. His writing is beautiful, yet often quite bleak. But I feel like it is so well done. And the reason I'm putting it here as slow paced is that it's not a quickly moving plot. And you definitely feel the plight of this family and these workers, but I don't feel like it's completely without hope. I feel like the characters continue to have hope that their situations will change and that things will get better and that they'll finally have the opportunities that they're looking for. And so I think that this is just such a well done book. Let's move on to some non-classics, kicking it off with some fantasy. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is such a great book. This is a very thick book. The other book Susanna Clarke wrote, Piranesi, is much thinner and reads much faster than Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I feel like Strange and Norrell is very Dickensian in its feel. So it's set during the time of the Napoleonic Wars in England, in a time where magic has all but disappeared from the landscape. And the men who are magicians in England, they just know about magic, but no one has practiced magic in a very long time. Until Mr. Norrell has a breakthrough in practicing magic, which kind of then explodes throughout the landscape. He takes Jonathan Strange on as an apprentice, and we kind of go from there. There's a lot of darkness in this story, but a lot of really, really interesting conversations happening here. And it is just absolutely fascinating the way that Susanna Clarke intertwines history and the Napoleonic Wars with so much fantasy as well. It is really fascinating the way that she does this. I think it's perfectly and expertly done. Again, it feels like a Dickens novel in the way that she writes. The writing is meandering intentionally. There are also illustrations in the book, which also remind me of Dickens books, how they would have the illustrations in there. And there's a lot of footnotes, which is really fun and also feels very Dickensian. So I love this book. I actually read it in the fall, but it has a very cold feeling to it. So I think it's also perfect for winter. The other fantasy that I'm going to recommend here is actually a series and slash author, and that's the Realm of the Elderling series by Robin Hobb. This is a 16-book series, but don't let that get you intimidated because most of them are split up into trilogies. I think one of them split up into 4 books instead of trilogies. And so as a result, you kind of have almost like these bite-sized chunk of series. I've not yet completed this series. I've read 2 of trilogies. So I've read 6 out of 16 books. And they have absolutely floored and wowed me. The first series is the Farseer trilogy, in which we follow Fitz, who is a young boy who is the bastard son of a prince, and we just follow him as he is kind of growing up as a lesser than person in kind of like he is where the royalty is, but he's not being raised as a royal because he's illegitimate. And so there's some really interesting magic and fantasy that's happening there. I feel like the world is really, really well crafted, really interconnected. We get a lot of reveals about the world in the first series. And then once we go on to the second series, which is the Live Ship Trader series, which I read this year, it's set in a completely different country, but it is some of the same magic, some of the same key things. You're getting even more reveals. Live Ship Traders is definitely more gritty than Farseer trilogy, so keep that in mind. It is also, I feel like, more evenly paced and plotted than Farseer. I think Farseer is slower in general, and Live Ship Traders is a little bit more even, and it's more about, you know, seafaring families who are merchants and traders and pirates. So they have very, very different settings, whereas Farseer trilogy feels more kind of medieval castle and keep kind of setting. So they're very different, but they're very expertly written, amazing. There's plenty of action on the pages of these books. So I'm not saying that these are just slow the whole way through, but they are slow beginnings and are more slow paced than a lot of typical like fantasy or romantasy kind of books that are like breakneck the whole way. These are certainly not breakneck. Hobb is an expert at character development, and it is amazing the way that she writes her characters, whether they are lovable characters or characters that you despise with all of your soul. Kyle, for example, if you know, you know, you're going to despise people in these books, but they are so well written and well crafted. Her writing is just beautiful, descriptive. The world is so well fleshed out, and the characters are even more fleshed out. I'm really looking forward to more Robin Hobb in 2026, in case you couldn't tell. Moving away from fantasy, I have a couple of different recommendations here that are translated from Japanese. I feel like Japanese translated literature is some of my favorite. So one of these is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Agawa. This is a really beautiful story about friendship, really. And it is about this housekeeper who comes in to work for this professor who has lost his memory. And so he remembers up until the point where he had this accident, but now his memory resets every 90 minutes. And so the housekeeper comes in and ends up kind of having a relationship with him, and her young son does too. And you just watch this friendship blossom and these connections happen. And it is just really beautiful. I will say the professor is a professor of math, and as a result, there is a lot of math in this book. And that was kind of the only thing that kind of dragged it down for me. I think if there had been less math, I would have enjoyed it more, but it is just such a beautiful and wholesome story of connection and friendship. An author who tends to write more slow-paced, reflective books is Kazuo Ishiguro, and I have read 3 of his books so far, and I'm actually going to recommend 2 of them here because I couldn't decide which one to recommend because they're so different. One of them is The Remains of the Day, which is a story of a man who has worked as kind of like a butler slash like overseer of the house for this man for decades. And he's going on this car trip, and as he is going on this road trip, he's reflecting on his time of service. And it is very, very slow paced, but the ending, this is what Ishiguro does. The ending is so thought-provoking that I'm thinking about it years later. The Remains of the Day is more historical, at least in its setting. The other one that I want to recommend is Clara and the Sun, which is futuristic in its setting, but it doesn't feel like it's too far distant in the future. In this story, there are AFs, or artificial friends, that are robots that are bought for children, to be companions for children, to help raise them in a society where people are increasingly isolated and don't have as much interaction with others. So it's to help with socialization and oversight of these children, and it is just very interesting. I really, really loved this book. This book has a lot of very interesting questions about what it means to be human and the relationship of humanity to technology. So I found it to be incredibly thought-provoking. It's my favorite Ishiguro so far, the only one that I've given 5 stars to, and I love it. So I recommend both of them because I think that Remains of the Day is Ishiguro's most popular work. It's not one of my favorites of his, but again, I'm still thinking about it. Years later, it was really, really meaningful at the end of the book. But Clara and the Sun, I actually loved the whole way through. I'm still thinking about that one too, but it hasn't been as long since I finished that book. But I think that he's a great author to dive into if you're looking for something a bit more slow and thought-provoking. The last book that I want to talk about is more of a fun one, more of a cozy one, but also not fast-paced. That's the Kamigawa Food Detectives. This is a Japanese cozy book. Apparently, Japanese authors put cats on the cover of their books if they're cozy books. And that doesn't mean that the cat plays a huge role in the book. It just signifies to the general public in Japan that this book is cozy. Someone told me that recently, and I thought that that was really interesting because sometimes there are cats on the cover and then there's not even a cat in the book. There is a cat in this book, but it doesn't play that big of a role. So essentially we have a man who used to be a detective and he's not. He has retired from the police force and he opened a restaurant. So people come to this restaurant in search of a meal that they have once tasted that has left a meaningful impact in their life, whether it's something that a dead loved one used to cook for them all the time, or maybe it's a meal they had at a restaurant during a very pivotal moment in their life that they remember, and that restaurant has now closed, and they are longing to recreate this recipe, but they can't figure out how. So they come to this man, they have a consultation, they tell him about the dish, and then he goes and does his detective work. They come back 2 weeks later and he presents the dish to them. And it is really just a wonderful book. It doesn't have a lot of detective work in it, honestly. Like, he tells you how he figures some of the stuff out, but you don't see him during his actual detecting process in those 2 weeks where he's trying to figure out the recipe. You see them when like the people come in for the consultation, and then you skip forward to two weeks later when they come in to have the dish. The book is much more focused on the emotions than it is about the actual like mystery and detective process and all of those things. But there's some really beautiful and meaningful stories in this book. I think there are now 3 of them that have been translated into English. There are more of them that are in Japanese, but they're being translated. I've read the first 2. Thought that they were both delightfully cozy and wonderful, and they do include the recipes online for the first book. I don't know if they do for the second book, but that was really fun. I actually recreated one of the meals as well after reading the book, and I just thought it was just wonderful. This was the book that got me into cozy Japanese literature, which is now like one of my favorite subgenres because they are slow, and even though they examine a lot of emotion and a lot of times there's grief in the books and there's people processing things, there's a gentleness to the way that it's written about in Japan that just makes it palatable and wonderful and cozy without feeling too much or too heavy. So those are some recommendations to you of some books that have a slower pace to them. Some of these books do still have action. Some of these books still do have like dark elements to them, so they're not all cozy and fluffy, but some of them are on the cozy side, like Kamigawa Food Detectives. But I hope that this is a list that helps you of some books if you're looking for something a little bit more slow-paced to get you through the chilly winter days. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you have any recommendations of slower books, leave them in the comments so this can just be a wealth for people who are looking for those kinds of books and recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.